Jack, welcome to Run with Fitpage. It's a weekly show where I speak to eminent athletes like you, coaches like you, and various researchers. And today we'll be talking all about Boston Marathon and the race course because that will benefit immensely for the incoming athletes later this year. So thank you so much for agreeing and speaking with me.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here with you, Vikas, and looking forward to meeting you when you get to Boston and hopefully meet some of the athletes that will be coming here from India as well.
Yeah, for sure. Jack, let me first start by congratulating you, which may have been now a few decades old, for winning Boston
La-
Marathon in 1976.
Thank
And
you very much. Yeah, last century.
yeah, and that was quite a hell of a race because of the temperature profile that day. And maybe let's start from there. How was that race, and how that came to being for you winning the Boston Marathon that year?
Okay, well, I'll try to be succinct in my response. I can drag this story out quite at length. I was a 27-year-old fifth year senior at Georgetown University. And the reason I was so old was I had spent 4 years in the military here between my first 2 years of undergrad and my final three at Georgetown. And I had run Boston three times prior when I was in the Coast Guard in 71, 2, and 3. I was in this, I had run, I was a walk on in college, but I moved up in cross country and lettered varsity letters at Arizona. And so I had a running start, but I was pursuing running. I'd played other sports when I was in high school, but running was totally it by the time I was in college. So so when I came up to Boston in '76 to run, I actually tried to get an Olympic trials qualifying time earlier in the year because Boston was only 6 weeks before our U.S. Olympic trial race to select our Olympic team for the '76 Montreal Games. And I knew it was going to be very competitive. Frank Shorter was returning as the reigning Olympic champion from '72. Bill Rogers had run won the first of his four Bostons in '75 the year before and set the American record at 209.55. So if those two were healthy, it was pretty much a sure thing they were going to take two of the three spots.
Yeah.
So it was up to the rest of us. But I had run the trials in '72 as a complete novice in the marathon, but I learned a lot. And so now I was excited and I was a more advanced athlete. So I thought there was a chance that I could make the team, but I wasn't sure. I hadn't run a marathon for a few years. Anyway, so that's what brought me to Boston. And my mindset was that while I wanted to be as competitive as I could be, of course, and I had finished 12th, was the highest of the three finishes I had in the earlier years. So I knew I could contend. I could get myself into the top 10 and be contending. Where that would actually get me in terms of finishing my finishing place, there are uncertainties in any marathon. So it's hard to toe the line and say, yes, I'm going to win this race. It's not like a mile or a 5K where if you feel you're the best athlete there, you have a real good chance of winning it. Just so many unknowns. Regardless, my mindset was that, and back then, by the way, Boston was a totally different type of race than it is today in terms of the support for the athletes. There were no official um, clocks on the course itself. Each mile marker, each kilometer marker was not marked at all. You didn't really know where you were. They had little distance markers, each of the towns that you ran through. So there are eight towns in Boston's course. So you start in Hopkinton and end in Boston. And in the six towns between those, there was a little sign that he put in the middle of the road that would tell you not how far you had run, but how far you had to go.
Okay.
And it was usually in fractions of a mile. So it was relatively meaningless, right, from a time standpoint in the marathon. And there was nobody reading times anyway. So you didn't really know where you were. Digital watches didn't exist. And there weren't no official water stops, a few
Oh, wow.
unofficial. Regardless, so that was the layout. And I had looked because I had run Boston before, and so I looked at all the results from previous years and realized that anything in the top 10 should get me my qualifying time. I had to run under 220 for the A standard and a sub 223 for the B standard, which means I could go, but I had to pay my own way. So anyway, that was the lay of the land, and I was supremely confident I could run somewhere in the maybe mid-teens, even though I hadn't run a marathon for a few years. I was that much older and more advanced and fitter, and my shorter distance times indicated I was in that ballpark. All I needed was good weather and a good field of runners. And so I had a good field of runners, but we didn't have the weather. As you mentioned earlier, it was
Yeah.
96 degrees on the thermometer at the starting line and probably above 100 on the pavement. So, but again, I thought I had enough of a cushion that at worst case scenario, if the heat cost me 5 minutes, I'm still under the B standard, so I'm going to get my time. So the heat didn't affect me mentally at all. And I just took all the necessary precautions. I started a little more conservatively than I otherwise would have. And all of a sudden I'm running along it turns out to be 5:20 pace. I didn't know exactly where I was running totally on feel. And I didn't move into the top 10 until Wellesley, the halfway point. But at that point, I saw all the 9 runners in front of me, all strung out on a long, sloping hill. And now all of a sudden I was in the top 10, and I was still very, very comfortable physically. And I thought, gee, all I have to do is finish up with where I am, and I'm going to be fine. And so again, I just ended up running very even pace the whole way. My two halves were only 17 seconds apart, 1:10:02, I think, and 1:10:17 for a 2:20:19. But everybody else had gone out too fast, and they all one by one started to die, and they all came back to me.
Yeah.
So I took the lead at the 18-mile mark, and never looked back. Interestingly enough, my number had washed off because we were running through a rainbow of garden hoses and whatnot. I literally would run off course from time to time into somebody's yard. They had a garden hose up
Oh my
on a step
goodness.
ladder for an outdoor shower, and I'd run under it and soak myself for 3 or 4 seconds, and then run on. That was what we had to do, and and so by the time I took the lead, my number had washed off, so they didn't know who I was, and of course I wouldn't tell them initially. But I had my school, Georgetown, was on my singlet, and that was with my name on the entry list. So finally, one of the guys on the photography truck looked down the list and saw Georgetown and figured out who I was. Anyway, so made for an interesting dimension of that year and the following year, which is a totally different story. Anyway, so I took the lead at 18, as I mentioned, in the Newton Hills, and just continued on. I felt perfectly fine. About 22 miles, my calves started cramping a little bit. I had to back off. I had a moment of panic, thinking, "Oh my goodness, I feel fine, except my calves cramping. If that goes, it's like a flat tire in an otherwise good car." But I backed off and realized, nope, I'm still running for time here. If somebody catches me and beats me, I'll come back next year and go for it again. But just stay relaxed and keep running to get your time, which I did. And as I say, I missed the A standard by 19 seconds. The
Yeah.
U.S. Olympic Committee decided not to give me any money to go to the trials, but I got my way paid and went out. Unfortunately, again, the race was only 6 weeks after Boston, and I was so excited having won that it bolstered my sense of a chance of making the team. Now that I really could contend for at least that third spot, and who knows, if Shorter or Rogers don't have their day, they're beatable too. But I overtrained and went to the starting line at the trials race, way overtired, so I didn't make the team. But that's fine. I was delighted with the win that year, and it kicked off my resurgence to my own road running and marathoning career, having then graduated from undergrad.
Yeah.
So
Beautiful. And it was such a great race also because like you said, the temperature was not favorable. In general conditions, you would not find Boston being that warm that day, but it is fairly unpredictable. On one year, it can be very cool, chilly and windy and raining,
mhm.
and on the one year, it can be hot and humid. And in your case, it was hot and humid, and equally difficult to be able to win the race. But what an amazing comeback it was for you.
Well, thanks. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I felt great. I've that notion that you catch lightning in a bottle, and it was the perfect race. My mindset going in, again, as I described earlier, that my primary focus was not on my place in the race, but the time that I could run,
Yeah.
and place was secondary to me. And usually that's not the case. You line up at a race as a competitive runner. If you're in contention to possibly win or finish in the top three and medal, your focus is on place, and consequently your opponents are adversaries, right? And you're
Yeah.
all chasing one thing. But in this case, my mindset was my and my opponents were my allies. I truly wanted them all to run as fast as they could to help me get the time that I was seeking.
Yeah.
And the place I finished was secondary, and there was a whole cognitive shift in that regard. And I realized that that actually is a very good cognitive structure for pursuing competition. That and There's a fabulous book titled The Inner Game of Tennis, authored by Timothy Galway,
Hmm.
and it's basically, and I taught sports psychology for about 27 years at Tufts University, having gotten an advanced degree in that later on. And this whole idea of the nature of competition and how it's a double-edged sword, it spurs us to do training we otherwise wouldn't do, and raises the level of adrenaline and stuff, and to prepare us for the fight or flight response, right?
Yeah.
And we prepare for battle and competition. But to the degree that our mind perceives our opponents as enemies, that elicits, again, the fight or flight response. And there are pros and cons to that. If we
Yeah.
get overly excited, get too tight, or start fearing that we're not going to accomplish the task at hand, we tend to confirm our greatest fears to ourselves, and end up crossing the finish line saying, that wasn't my best race. I know that I'm fitter than that. What happened?
Yeah.
And it's usually because of the mindset going in more so than the physical. The physical follows the mental. And so in this case in Boston 76, it was very much that way, and it released me completely from the bondages of what we call competition anxiety.
Right.
I was as relaxed as I had ever been in a major race in my entire career. And I used that in subsequent years of racing. Not every race, you're not able to tap into that completely, but in 78, 2 years later, when I ran my PR, I ran 9 minutes faster on the same
Yeah.
course. And the weather conditions were much, much better,
Better.
and the field was very strong again. But but I found myself, because I had won the race in 76, the expectations of myself and people outside looking in,
Yeah.
the expectation was that I should be able to contend again. And I believed that I should be able to contend again. But when I started focusing too much on the outcome, I knew it would contaminate my performance. So I ran that same cognitive structure through and through, and decided, I wrote in my journal, no matter what happens, no matter what the result is, I'm determined to cross the finish line, taking my last effective steps. I'm going to run smart first and tough second, and know that I've left it all out there, and that I couldn't have run any better, and then the results will just be what they're going to be.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, as I say, I ran a 9-minute PR, ran my 2:11,
Yeah.
and it still wasn't as fast as I thought I was capable of running. I got stuck behind the press bus several times that in the final 3 miles. So it probably cost me a little bit of time. But I always thought I would come back and run faster, but I was getting a little bit older, and then injuries set in. Then when I came back the next year, I cracked the tibia bone in my shin about 6 weeks before the race, and I was in even better shape getting ready for that race. So that didn't happen. The next year was 1980. President Carter called the boycott. The United States didn't go to Moscow. So a whole cascade of
Yeah.
things happened after that. So I never did run faster than that, but I was delighted, because I think a lot of people were saying, yeah, he won the race, but the Americans weren't there. They were all getting ready for the Olympic trials, and and he hadn't run fast. So finally running a fast one was as satisfying to me personally as winning in 76.
Awesome. And you said a very important point, that was running smart than running tough. And I think that's possibly also the mantra for going and doing Boston Marathon really, really well. And so I think this could be a great segue, basis your experience, and also on the basis of you coaching thousands of runners in the last few decades. When Ambi and I spoke, he also spoke very highly of your coaching career that has been. I thought, because from India there are so many runners going this year, and also alike to very similar to any other runner, whether age group or elite. One of the things they give most importance to is how the course is going to behave, and having a familiarity, a deep familiarity to the course helps. And
Yeah.
when you look at Boston Marathon course, it seems like in the start that, hey, it starts from a downhill, must be easy, and then it catches you off guard. And I thought, who better than you can help people guide through how should they approach in the next 1 week leading up to Boston Marathon, whether it's to get to the start point or to approach the race in itself. Let's maybe try to break it down mile by mile, or whichever way you think is right.
Sure. All right. Well, getting out to the start this year because of COVID and the new procedures and protocols that the BA has put into place, everybody is back sort of in the same boat. You take the BAA or the race buses out to Hopkinton, the starting town, and they let you off into the athletes village, which is a large crowd area. They've got some overhead tents, of course, and some indoor spaces for charity runners actually. But and then that's sort of a pooling pen, and then they'll release runners through announcements based on their bib numbers and the various waves and corrals that they are have been previously assigned. So that should be a pretty smooth process. And I'm guessing that once you get to the starting line in 2018, because it was raining and such a dismal weather day,
Yeah.
when runners got to the starting line, they didn't make them wait there in a big pack of 10,000 for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or more and then release them all because of chip timing now. As soon as they got to the start, they just let them go. And I don't know if that's going to happen this year, but I think they probably are reluctant to pack a lot of people in still because of COVID. So I'm guessing that once you release from the athletes village and walk up to the start, which is almost a mile, that you'll probably be able to go pretty quickly across the starting line and get going. So you mentioned, yeah, that first mile is a steep downhill, and if you're running with a big pack, or in this, they do a kind of a semi-rolling start, you won't be packed. You won't have as many people packed around you, but there'll be enough runners right there
Right.
to seduce you into going
Go
faster
faster.
than you should. 98% of the field at Boston every year they run what we call positive splits. They run faster first half than the second half. And it's due to a host of factors. We're obviously well rested for the race. We're excited for it. The adrenaline's flowing. That's true at any marathon, whether it's a flat course or a downhill start. And but it's even easier to get seduced into going out too fast
Yeah.
at Boston because of all of those things I just mentioned and that very significant downhill start. So just about everybody goes out too fast, and some of them intentionally, with the reasoning being that because the uphills exist between mile 16 and 21, that they need to build some time into their pacing.
Right.
Okay, and run a little faster on the downhills because they're going to lose that time on the uphills, is the reasoning. And it's a very false narrative, in my opinion. The smarter approach is to use the downhills to conserve energy.
Right.
So if you're planning to run 8-minute pace, a 3.5-hour marathon, and that's what you're really ready for on a flat course, say, to run downhill, you can either run your 8-minute pace effort and run 7:30s on the downhills, or you can conserve energy and run at an 8:30 effort pace.
Yeah.
So you're running even slower. You're actually holding yourself back. You're still going to get your 8-minute mile. And I believe that is by far the more prudent way to go. So conserve energy on the downhills by running even easier. And in fact, the runners that I coach, I tell them that for the first 10 miles to 13 miles, if you don't feel like you're going too slow, you're going too fast. That literally in order to run even splits at Boston, or even negative splits. I mean, Cosmas Sandetti, one of the years he won and set the course record, he ran a 3-minute negative split.
Oh, wow.
My best races at Boston, I ran even splits. And I got to the halfway point at Wellesley very, very comfortably. I mean, I was just feeling nothing. I literally was holding myself back on the steeper downhills. So the big downhills are mile 1. And then it just kind of rolls downhill a little bit. And then coming into Wellesley is near the 20K mark is another pretty good downhill. So, and it's the Scream Tunnel also. The college students there at Wellesley College, it's an all-women's school.
Yeah.
And they're out. They now have a reputation. It's called the Scream Tunnel. And you can hear them from a half a mile before you get there. And the energy that's there just is easy to kind of sweep you along, and all of a sudden you do a surge. and you get to the other end of it and you realize, oh my goodness, what did I just do? So, so, so again, and that's down, there's a downhill section there too. So to hold back on those sections and just wait and wait. If you're going to take advantage of downhills and trying to run faster because it's downhill, save that for the last 5 miles, because it's also, excuse me, all downhill from there. Heartbreak Hill crests at about close to 21-mile mark, and then you run a little saddle, and then you're running past Boston College, and it starts downhill, and it's downhill all the way. It's more than 100 feet high at Boston College, about 120 feet, and it's only 10 feet in altitude at the finish line. So that's all downhill. It's even though the hills that exist from mile 16 to 21, there are four hills of 600 to 800 meters in length each, and everything else in that 5 mile stretch is flat and somewhat downhill.
Right.
So not only do you want to back off a little bit on the downhills to conserve energy and not try to make up time, not try to bank time, but on the uphill sections, when you get to them, to not attack them and try to keep your pace. You lean into it a little bit, of course, assuming that you still feel very good, and you should at that point. You lean into a little bit so you don't give the course too much time, but you'll give it a little bit of time on those uphills. But again, they're only 600 to 800 meters in length
Right.
total.
Right.
And then and now you're well into the race. You're somewhere between 16 and 21 miles. So you have a better sense and a feel of what you have left, and for the distance you have left. And you can start making up some of your time on those flat stretches between the uphills. But not so much that you still exhaust yourself. You still want to get to the top of Heartbreak Hill with now 5 miles to go, still with some pretty good bounce in your leg. You may need to back off a little bit to kind of catch your breath after that last big hill. But once you start running downhill, if you're going to run well at Boston, you need to have saved your legs for those last 5 miles of downhills. So it's the downhills that do all the damage at Boston, and people
Got it.
don't realize that. So also running a little bit faster on the downhills because gravity just pulls you along. We accomplish that we run a little faster by taking longer strides
Yeah.
typically. And in so doing, just a little bit longer stride forces the quad to do its eccentric contraction exponentially more vigorously each and every step. And after 15, 16 miles, I mean, I can't tell you how many people have told me that their legs were really hurting already at 16 miles. So the prudent approach is to do everything you can to prevent that from happening,
Right.
by not running any faster than you should, by staying on the pace that you had planned, provided the weather conditions are acceptable to the pace that you feel you're prepared to run. That's always important. And right now, the weather forecast 10 days out looks like it's not going to be very overly hot. It's going to be, maybe close to 60,
Okay.
which could cost the average runner upwards of 1% off of what would be the absolute perfect pace. And so that might be somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds a mile for the first half, if it gets a little warmer than that, to slow down. And then if you find that you've been more conservative than you needed to be, you'll have just that much more energy for the second half of the race anyway. So you're not having given the course time that you'll never get back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I hope that you understand that. And again, so you get to, with 5 miles to go, it's all downhill, and you really want to be full of run. And if you're still just running even pace, you're going to be passing a lot of people, because just about everybody's slowing down
Right.
that stretch.
Right.
And it's, just psychologically, even though we're not racing all these other people necessarily, it's better to be a passer than a passee, right? So psychologically, we get that boost because we know we're still running well, and it's just a psychological boost to not be struggling too much, or even if you are, provided you're not slowing down too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's better to run. Let me put it in another frame of reference. Far better to be 15 seconds a mile too slow through the first half than 5 seconds a mile too fast.
Wow.
It's that dramatic.
Yeah. That's a
And I'm sorry.
That's very valid point, and good that you quantified, because that is something that people need to take away. Because, like you said, the energy is going to be so eclectic at the start point, regardless of what we have discussed here and what they have heard. They are going to go out fast, and unless
Mhm.
they keep these numbers in mind, I think it's not going
Right.
to be effective. So it's very good that you mention of that. I have a couple of related questions before we
Mhm.
continue, because it's just so important for people to be aware of. One housekeeping logistics question is that, at the start point, as people start, is it similar to Chicago, where the GPS is generally pretty off, or the GPS is generally spot on? Do you have an idea of that?
That I don't know. I'm not sure what you're referencing in terms of the GPS,
So,
the
so
locale
yeah, in
or the terrain.
Chicago, what happens is, because of the buildings, the high-rise buildings, the watches do not provide right pace, and it doesn't give the right
Oh, I see.
speed.
I see. I don't believe that's an issue out in
Okay,
Hopkinton. The only thing that would get in the way would be the trees
right.
because there are no tall buildings.
Yeah.
And I haven't heard that as a reference point from
Uh,
any of the runners that I train, and they all wear GPS watches
then
now.
it's good.
Yeah, I've not heard that as being an issue whatsoever. So that really should be no problem.
Perfect.
Um, but again, that first mile is so dramatically downhill. As a matter of fact, there are videos, sort of high speed videos shot from the car cam that you can go watch online on YouTube. You can find them; they're very easy. And while they don't do full justice to how dramatic some of the downhills are, if you watch them a few times, and each one only takes 5 minutes or 10 minutes to watch, you can get a good sense of how rolling those hills are. And most people who come to Boston for the first time run the course unseen
Yeah.
beforehand, and so it's not critically important that you have run the course. Certainly, it helps with any course if you're familiar with it. And the team that I train, the charity team that I train, we do run on the course a fair amount, but still the majority of our team is from outside the area, Boston area here. So, and they unless they run the course before the race itself before, they are new to it. And again, I sort of extol these virtues of going out slower than you really think you need to go. And again, it's just far better to if you make the mistake, because our mind is still thinking, especially if you're chasing a particular time.
Yeah.
There's part of our mind that just won't let us slow down enough because we think we're giving away time that we'll never get back. And it's really not true. You can run negative splits on this course. Boston can be a very fast course. I mean, some of the world's greatest marathoners have run their fastest times at Boston, from Bill Rogers to Rob DiCostella, Uda Pippig, Joni Samuelson. She did run a little bit faster in Chicago later. But some of the premiers, my PR by far is here at Boston. And so if with good weather, and again, it looks like if it's under 60 degrees Fahrenheit here,
Yeah.
the wet bulb and the humidity is low enough so that the wet bulb temperature is below 50. That's pretty much a green light that whatever pace the runners were training to run, as long as it's a valid assessment of their fitness. A lot of people use their training paces to assess what their fitness level is and what pace they should run the marathon if it's their first one. And usually that's not the best measure. It's too late now is to
Yeah.
run a race, a half
Yeah.
marathon, a 10K, a 5K. All the finishing times that we achieve in those can be interpolated and to calculate a reasonable marathon pace. And so for those of you coming over from India, running your first marathon, um, um, and I'm not sure how many have qualified, so they'd be veteran marathoners. But that assessment again is really important for the first timers. They probably have been schooled by their coaches to not be thinking of a finishing time, just run the race, enjoy it, and your primary goal is to finish. And that is true, but it is important to have an honest sense of what pace you should be running, because again, at Boston, you can be running 20 or 30 seconds a mile faster than you should over the first half for
Yeah.
all the reasons we've just explained. And another measure of comparing this to again try to bring home this point of how important it is to go out conservatively enough that if you're whatever the ideal pace is for you, and we won't know until after the actual race. If you look at your splits and say,
Yeah.
well, I ran even splits, I took my last effective steps at the finish line, that's as fast as I could have run today. Let's say whatever that is, if another runner is at that same level, but they go out just 5 seconds a mile faster per mile for the first half, they will pay at a rate of 3 or 4 to 1 over the second half. So
Wow.
they'll average 15 to 20 seconds a mile slower. And it doesn't start happening at mile 14. It's mile 14 still probably okay, and 15, and then they slowly but gradually and exponentially
They
get
start to.
slower and slower. And that means, the course will take its due. It
Yeah.
will make you pay back in interest, in high interest payments, which means now if you've been running 8 or 9 minute pace, the course wants you owe it a couple of 12-minute miles or 13-minute miles, which means you're walking
Yeah.
over the last 3 or 4 miles at some points because of fatigue, and that's where the payback is.
Right.
So infinitely better to cross the finish line knowing you had a little bit left in your legs, and maybe you could have run a little bit faster, 30, 60 seconds or something like that. But the risk of padding the time early in the early miles is just a fool's errand.
Sure.
The course will take its due.
Yeah, no,
So,
no, that makes absolute sense. Do you think then to support runners because the race has been such that it has a unique course fairly? Do you think to support runners, the pacers generally take a negative split to even split approach, or how does that happen?
Boston never employs pacers that I know of.
Yeah,
Unlike Chicago and a lot of the others where they have pace groups, 3 hour, 3:30, 4 hours, and they'll have a runner holding a sign or something.
yeah,
Nobody's ever done that at Boston. So Boston certainly does not do that from an official standpoint. Some groups may do that, or they may just talk amongst themselves. But for all the runners that you're
yeah,
trying to educate here in this process, um, you'll be running. You can be talking to the runners around you,
yeah.
and ask them what they're hoping to run or what pace they're hoping to run. But be aware in the early miles, they're almost all of them are going faster than they
Faster
should.
than you. Yeah, yeah,
So if you want to run, a 10-minute pace, a 4:22 marathon, and you're running along you're going to be starting with people roughly at your level anyway. And so you're chatting with somebody. If they run the course a number of times and they acknowledge it's so easy to go out fast, you got to hold back, then that's somebody you might pay attention to and latch yourself onto and use as a pacer for sure.
yeah.
But if it's somebody who has never run it before, has only run it once or twice, and they're just running along, chances are they're going faster than they should. If they say, "Yeah, I'm hoping to break 4 hours," for example, or 4:22, run 10-minute pace. Um, if they're running 9:40s, they're thinking, "Well, okay, I'm going to get to the halfway point a little bit ahead of time," but they don't realize what's waiting for them the second half. It's if you're running faster than what your pace is prepared for. Boston should be run as an even split course,
Right.
despite the fact that the uphills come in the second half. There's still a lot. Most of it's downhill still, even the second half from Wellesley to Boston drops about 150 feet,
Got it.
despite those four uphills I mentioned. So.
Right, right. No, very, very important, and thank you for highlighting that there are no pacers officially. And this, I wanted to ask this question on purpose because some people might oversee this fact because they might assume that this race will also have pacers officially, which is not the case. So they should be aware. That makes a lot of sense. Now, from a hydration and race support point of view, how the race is positioned. Of course, we know that it's a race that is known for what it's built over a period of decades and centuries, and it is the best race in the world, no doubt. But what should people expect on the way from a fueling, hydration point of view, etc.?
Well, there's information in the marathon guide to
Yeah,
tell you, and there's a water stop at every mile,
yeah,
and they provide both water and Gatorade. And I think they've changed it from time to time, but usually they put water on one side of the road and the Gatorade on the other side. And the Gatorade they provide is what's called an endurance formula, which is double the sodium of what you would buy at the store typically. So it's a higher sodium content. And they started doing that. I think Gatorade actually made it because one runner a number of years ago died. She was running the Boston Marathon. It was a warm day, very hot, and she suffered from hyponatremia, which is not from drinking. The mistake, the misunderstanding is that it was assumed that she simply drank too much water. But the reality was she simply did not take enough sodium
Right.
in. And so that depleted her sodium, her electrolyte levels. And if that gets too extreme, then the body starts to shut down, and it's not able to actually utilize and absorb the water into the cells that we're drinking. So you can be running with a stomach full of water, and you can feel it sloshing around.
Yeah.
But if your sodium levels are too low, then the body's not absorbing it, and it's not getting back into the bloodstream and into the muscles as necessary. So dehydration happens 25 to 1 relative to an extreme case of hyponatremia. So again, the secret is not to limit your fluid intake. It's just to make sure you're getting ample sodium.
Sodium.
And if it was a particularly warm day, if it turns out to warm up and be 65 degrees and sunny, that's enough where you're going to have to slow your pace down, number one. And if somebody was a heavy sweater and they're out there for 4.5 hours and they sweat, say, a gallon of sweat, the amount of sodium in that sweat is probably still double what you will replenish in this endurance formula Gatorade.
Yeah.
If you drank a gallon of Gatorade, which you probably won't do. You'll drink half Gatorade and half water. So now you're really only replenishing maybe 25% or 30% of the sodium that you've lost. Now, for some people, you're able to get away with that because the body stores an ample supply of sodium typically. But some people, maybe they're going into a little bit low to begin with, and those individuals could then really run into problems. If they don't suffer true hyponatremia and kind of collapse on the course,
Yeah.
it will simply significantly degrade your ability to run, and you end up walking and you're just exhausted. So salt supplementation is a good thing, and the salt sticks, you can get salt tablets or salt sticks commercially. They're readily available now. And most people tolerate them. I've never heard of anybody having problems, even if you've never used them. But if you're thinking of doing that, probably now is a good time. Do it on your last couple training runs. Pop a couple of them. Make sure your stomach doesn't reject them, and then carry a few of them in the race itself. When you start to fade, people think it's a lack of fluid or a lack of sugar, and quite often it's really the salt levels are starting to get a little bit low. So,
Got it.
triathletes who are out there for longer periods of time and ultra runners, they're very keenly aware of the sodium replacement requirements. And marathoners, to some degree are, but I think it's not emphasized to the degree that it could be from a beneficial standpoint. So that's something else, excuse me, to consider.
Sure. No, makes sense. And I think this year round, the hydration partner is Morton now, if I'm not wrong.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah,
They've
in
had,
Muriton, there are going to be 3 stations out there. And again, I think the BAA literature will explain exactly
yeah.
where. I think there's one at 11 miles, maybe one at 18 roughly, and another one at 21. And some of the runners I've been listening to they've been taking it and have no problem with it. I've had others say they tasted it and didn't like it at all.
Oh, I love
So
it.
I think it's probably not a good idea to take it if you've never tried it. I
Yeah.
mean, the worst case scenario is you don't like it and you spit it out or something like that. But it's hard to know how your body will respond to it if
Respond
you've
to it.
never had it before.
Right.
So, most runners, if they like a particular product, they all do pretty much the same thing. There's sugar and electrolytes, and then you chase it down with some water. It's typically a good idea. But you want to go with you want to dance with what brung you, so to
Yeah.
speak. So if you're accustomed to using power gel or a typical other kind of goo or an electrolyte replacement paste or the jelly, the beans or whatever, to go with those, carry them with you and utilize those. But if you run into trouble, if you drop it or something like that, or you find you've gone to the starting line and forgot to take it from from your hotel room or whatever, it is out there. So there's going to be some. But the Muriton, again, until they became a sponsor, there was none of that on the course, and people were perfectly fine.
Yeah.
Going all the way back to the 70s, which we started talking about early
Yeah.
on, there were no water stops out there, other than what people were handing out along the side of the course. How we ever survived that compared to what's available today, I have no idea. But also coming back to the pacing notion,
Yeah.
the idea of walking through the water stops that you're going to utilize rather than, we're in a hurry, but we're not in a rush. So
Yeah.
to grab your drink, to grab a cup of water and a cup of Gatorade, continue on down and get out of the way, away from the tables, and so you're not impeding any of the other runners. Get over the side if you want to mix it so that you're diluting the Gatorade a little bit, because those each of the 25 water stops, they make the Gatorade that they're offering from a powder, and they
Right.
pour it in a big bin and put the water in and mix it all up. And every one is slightly different than the others,
True.
and it just depends on the individual volunteers and how they're mixing it. They're trying to keep to the right formula, and usually they do, but there still can be some variability. So to be aware of that. And later in the race, finally, it's the goo, or you're drinking Gatorade and you feel you need it, but your stomach doesn't want to take it. And so maybe diluting a little bit, mixing 50-50 water and Gatorade is a good way to do that. But you need to be walking to actually drink it. If you try to drink that, you squeeze the cup and you're running and you don't want to that's simply because you don't want to give the course a few seconds of time. And that's an imprudent thing also. Go ahead and walk. You can walk briskly. You're not giving up that much time. But
Yeah.
if you walk for 30 or 45 seconds, get your drink, recompose yourself, give yourself that conscious reminder that I'm in a hurry, but I'm not in a rush.
And restart.
And your heartbeat drops a couple beat, or your heart rate drops a couple beats perhaps, and you start running again. And you look up at the runners that were around you who didn't stop for any water or didn't slow down to a walk to drink it. They're only 40 or 50 meters ahead of you.
Yeah.
And within the mile, you've caught them. And now
True.
you're a little more refreshed than they are, maybe just a little. But if you multiply that over 10 or 15 water stops, it's a big, big difference.
Yeah. No, very,
So,
very valid point.
yeah. And in the extreme case, for people who are running, 4.5 hours or slower, simply doing the run walk pacing makes a lot of sense. Jeff Galloway, of course,
Yeah.
popularized that whole notion of doing run walk, and people have their various paces. They'll run 5 minutes, walk a minute, run 10 minutes, walk. If you're running 10-minute pace, you basically run 10 minutes, then walk a minute through the water stops. But if you might be walking more frequently than that. But interestingly, the difference between 5 minutes of running and a minute walking, 4 minutes versus 4 minutes of running, a minute walking, versus 3 minutes of running and a minute walking is not that significant over an entire hour of movement.
True.
At 3-1, you're running 45 minutes and walking 15.
Yeah.
At 4-1, you're only running 48 minutes. You
Yeah.
only run 3 more minutes in the course of an hour at 4-1. And yet the difference between running 3 minutes and 4 minute stretches is significantly greater. But you
That's
don't
right.
get a good return on that investment. So I found that 3-1 is a real sweet spot for people who are running. The slower you're running overall, if you're trying to run 5 hours or 4 hours, 4.5 hours, that you're not only are you not really losing any time by doing this run walk in the second half or the last third of the race, you're still much more in control of yourself, much more refreshed and able to really take advantage of those last 5 miles of downhill. And by the time you get to that point, if you have been prudent in your pacing and maybe doing run walk, now you still have a lot of bounce in your leg and a lot of energy in your system. And then maybe at that point you can go ahead and run much more, if not all the way in.
Yeah.
So, but I've heard other people say, well, I'm going to run as far as I can and then I'll do run walk. They have it
That's not how
backwards.
it works.
The idea of doing run walk is so you never walk because you have to.
Right. True. True. No. Look, I almost completed the whole Boston Marathon virtually through your experiences and through your tips. Jack, I
Uh,
think it has been so insightful for people who are going to run faster, people who are running for the first time, or they are running and going to be walking for a time other than what they were doing, or anything else. These strategies are, I think, extremely important. It's about 10 days out from now, and we all are
right.
excited to be in Boston and hopefully see you in person pretty soon. This has been so amazing. Is there any other points that you would want to let our listeners know before we sign off?
Well, I think to just be determined to really enjoy
Right.
the experience. Those of you from India are coming. I think I saw 60 some runners on the list
Yeah, 65
last time.
coming from India, total 110, but out of them 65 are coming from India.
Okay, all right. So, because this running a marathon is something that you prepare for over 4, 5, 6 months. Every day you're thinking about it, even if you're not running or training on a given day, you're taking a day off, you're still thinking about it.
Yeah,
So this is the sort of the culmination of that whole time, and we start thinking of it as a final examination, right? That I'm either going to pass or fail,
yeah,
and so the excited anticipation rises to a level of anxiety,
yeah,
right? And we get nervous and anxious. And if we really try to define and describe right out to ourselves, what am I nervous about? People who are chasing an ambitious time maybe want to requalify or something like that. There's a little more at stake. And so that raises the level. But again, I addressed a little earlier how best to achieve a given result is to
true.
it's not necessarily a direct line toward that. So, and certainly for our charity runners, I remind them that this is as much of a celebration of all the work that they've already done.
Yeah,
So to relax, let yourself enjoy it and let it come out. And if it's there, it will come out no matter what.
yeah,
And if it's not, if you're having a bad day, you're having a bad day, but you're still having a positive experience in having run the Boston Marathon. And there's always tomorrow. We can always come back again and take another shot with what we may have learned. But if we really have a conversation with ourselves about being determined to really stay relaxed and enjoy this, don't let the outcome, our pursuit of a given outcome, contaminate our performance. Stay focused on the performance, on the here and now, 1 mile at a time. These are all cliches, but they're cliches because they're true. So to focus on that and have a good time, and I think they'll finish. I used to tell people that if they can dance at the party we have after the race, that's the sign. That's the litmus test of having run a good race.
beautiful. Thank you so much.
So
This is such a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure everybody will have a good race. Good luck to everyone, and good luck to you
yeah,
too and your athletes, Jack. Thank you so much.
you're very welcome, Vikas. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to seeing you and arrive here in Boston.
Alrighty, have a good one. Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
take care. All the best. Bye.
Bye.